What other kinds of costs should I be considering when I'm buying a house? Or what other additional costs are there when I'm buying a house?
Yeah, in addition to the remaining purchase price, there's going to be a few other things that a buyer needs to be aware of. First, there's going to be what's called land transfer tax. That is a tax that the government of Manitoba imposes on anybody who acquires real property in Manitoba. That is always based on the fair market value of the property. And if you're buying a property, typically that fair market value will be whatever the purchase price in your contract was. Other additional costs will include things like legal fees, and legal fees will also have disbursements, meaning out-of-pocket expenses that a lawyer has to go through in each file. For a real estate file, there's always certain searches that have to be performed. Title searches, municipal taxes, additional fees that a buyer has to consider over and above the remaining amount of the actual purchase price. Land transfer tax, that is a tax that the Manitoba government requires anybody who acquires property in Manitoba to pay to the government. Second, there will be legal fees involved, which it will also include taxes and disbursements. And there's also other things that a buyer might want to include, such as title insurance.
What happens if there are problems after I take possession of the house?
That depends on what the offer says. Sometimes an offer might be conditional, saying that everything's going to be in working order on the date of possession. And so if something doesn't work and falls under that condition, that's something that a buyer has the ability to take back to the seller and say, oh, the seller, you're responsible for this because you told me it would be working and it's not. If there's other larger issues that occur, that will either lead to negotiation between the buyer and the seller's side to determine what may or may not be able to be done. And if negotiations fail, then at the end of the day, litigation is the last resort.
All right, so you talked a little bit earlier about title insurance. Tell me about title insurance. It sounds exciting.
So when someone takes possession of a property, they know that they can go into the property, they have a key to the house, great. But legally, what shows you're the owner of that property is your title, that piece of paper that says your name on it. And just like there can be physical defects on a property, that's why you have property insurance, there can also be defects against a person's title. And property insurance doesn't include title defects. So an example of a title defect: fraud. Someone pretends to be you and they register another mortgage against your title, and now you have two mortgages to pay out. If you get your first water bill and it is $80,000 and you know there's no possible way that you could have used all of that water, that would be considered a title defect. Encroachments. If you take possession of your property and you find out that something was built on your property that's actually also on the neighbor's, or vice versa, the neighbor built something that turns out to be on your property, and this was all done before you ever owned the property, that would be considered a title defect. And probably the most common title defect that comes up in Manitoba is when a previous owner of the property you now own built something on the property without the proper building permit, and now you as the current owner are being told by a governmental authority such as the city or municipality that you need to fix it.
Okay, wow. So I guess title insurance is important then.
Title insurance is incredibly important when, especially, title insurance is incredibly important, especially when you are buying used residential property, because who knows what happened to that property 30, 40, 50 years ago.
All right, so now let's talk about sellers.
We're going to talk now about healthcare directives. Can you tell me what a healthcare directive is and what it may be known as more commonly in other jurisdictions?
In Manitoba, things don't all happen on the date of possession. Which
in
means
Manitoba,
it is
there's,
very
a
common
healthcare
that a
director
seller does
act.
not
A
receive
healthcare
all of the
director
money right
is
on
where
date
you
of possession.
will appoint a healthcare
Reason
proxy.
being,
A
most of
healthcare
the
proxy
time,
is the person
a
who can
buyer
make
will be getting a
healthcare
mortgage,
decisions on your
which
behalf.
means they
Typically
aren't
when you're at a
providing
point
all
where
of the
you
money
are
to the
unable
lawyer to
make those
send over.
decisions,
It's going to be
because
coming
you're
from a
on life
bank
support,
or a
you're
credit union.
unconscious.
And
So they
while the
will
buyer's
work
lawyer
with
may
the
request
doctors,
those funds to be
and
sent over on
express your
possession,
wishes for your
that doesn't
typically
mean
your
a bank or a
end-of-life,
credit union is going to do that.
decisions.
And since we don't
Okay. Is
have
there
any
anything else I can do with
say over
Healthcare
the
Directive
buyer's
Act?
bank or credit
Healthcare
union,
Directive, rather?
we just simply have to wait until we get the money.
Yes, there
We
is.
don't
I
have
can
the
list
money, we
the
can't
type
do
of
anything with it, which means we
treatments
can't
that I do not want to
give the
receive.
balance to the seller if we haven't received the balance of the
Yes.
money.
I don't know what
That's
to-
So how
different than
long
a
does
proxy.
it usually take then for
Right.
a seller to
That's-
get?
So you can either name a proxy,
We
or you
typically
can name
say it's
in the
about 1 to 2
Healthcare
weeks
Directive, you
following
can name,
possession
list
before we can have
the
everything
treatments
paid
that you
out.
want to receive or do
And
not
that's to
want to
give us a
receive.
little bit of the
Or you can do
cushion
both.
because we don't know when we're going to get all of the
Okay, then do not answer that
money.
question.
Not to say that it
Sorry.
couldn't take
Trace, don't use that.
when real estate season gets
Um,
I don't
busy
draft
through the
healthcare
summer
directives.
months,
Okay,
sometimes
we're now going
it
to talk
does
about
take
trusts.
longer.
Okay,
What
so I need
kind
you
of
to lean
costs
that a little bit
should I be
forward.
aware of
Okay,
in
so how do I
addition
provide
to
for
commission
minor
that I
children
know
in my
about?
will?
So for minor
And
children,
possibly the legal
there's
fees, so
typically a
that's
trust
gonna
set
cost
up
money.
where the executor
So
doesn't
if
have to be
you
the
have a
executor,
mortgage
can
on
appoint a special
title,
trustee, but it's usually the
then
executor.
that has to be
will
paid
hold
out.
their portion of the estate in
Because
trust
you no
until
longer
they
own the
reach a certain
property, you can no
age.
longer hold a mortgage
So
on
at
title of
18,
that
if you
property.
want, they can
And so from the
receive their
sale
inheritance,
proceeds,
or
your
what
mortgage
a
will
very
be paid
common
out.
scheme is to do what we call a delayed distribution scheme. So a lot of my clients want their minor children to inherit only a small portion when they're 18, and then maybe 25% when they're in their early 20s, and then the remaining when they're a little older, when they're closer to 30, like 28, 30 years old. That's a very common scheme. It's also very common to give enough discretionary power to your trustee or executor to give that child more than they might be entitled to under the will, to add some flexibility in for certain life events. So if that child, for example, gets admitted into Harvard Law School and they need money for education, then you give the power to the executor to make the decision that is in the best interest of the child to get more than, say, the 10% that they were allowed under the will at the age of 18.
Is that where you went to school, Harvard?
I wish, no, I went to the University of Manitoba.
Okay. How do I provide for a child who is incompetent?
So there are certain trusts called Henson trusts that we will draft for a child who has disability issues.
And under what conditions would we draft a Henson Trust?
So if this is a child who is going to be disabled for life and will be under government assistance as a disabled person, it's very important to have a lawyer draft a properly worded Henson Trust. And the purpose of a Henson Trust is to not only ensure that that child is well taken care of for their life, but also to protect that inheritance in a way that it doesn't affect their ability to qualify for government assistance for disabled people. So when the government is assessing if somebody requires assistance as a disabled person, they will take into account their income and their assets. So by holding the assets from your will in a trust that is called a Henson Trust, it is not considered an asset that vests in that child. That child does not actually own the asset, but they would have the benefit of funds from that trust from time to time to take care of their needs.
Are Henson Trusts legal across Canada?
That you would want to consult with lawyers in other provinces, because I know that the law varies from province to province.
And I also believe that Alberta has made them non-effective.
That is correct.
Well, that's very interesting. How do I provide for a child who is not necessarily incompetent, but either cannot manage their money very well or has addiction problems?
Right, so that is a very good question. Again, we can look at setting up a trust under the will. The issue in that case is you're dealing with a competent person, but somebody who's a spendthrift or an addict. So there is a potential that they can collapse the trust and take the money. So it's not a complete 100% safeguard that they will not be able to get their full lump sum out of the estate. So if you're really concerned about this child and you do not anticipate that they're going to be turning their life around any time in the near future, we often recommend that clients explore options such as annuities, which you would want to talk to your financial advisor or your insurance provider more about. But an annuity is a possible avenue to explore. It locks in the trust money into an insurance product that can never be unlocked, so that this child would for the rest of their lives have a guaranteed monthly income, and there's no chance that they would be able to collapse that and take out the lump sum.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Pearson. We are now going to talk about real estate.